Now, let me tell you a little bit about these people. You've heard them speak today on the main stage, but maybe I'll tell you some things you don't know about them. Melissa, you're the author of Escaping the Build Trap and CEO of Products Labs.
Yes.
You were telling me that the thing you enjoy most out of everything you do across speaking, training, and coaching teams, consulting for tech companies, and advising startups and scale-ups was to actually come to events just like this one, to meet the product community and share your knowledge. You live in South Carolina. Mm-hmm. You love remodeling projects. You recently remodeled your porch and soon your mum's porch. Mm-hmm. So if anyone needs remodeling advice, reach out to Melissa. Maybe she'll give you a discount.
I'll tell you what not to do.
Ryan, you're one of the founders of 37 Signals, the company behind products
Early employee, not founder.
Early employee of 37 Signals, the company behind Basecamp, the online project management and collaboration platform. You're the founder of Felt Presence and author of ShapeUp, a product development methodology that is gaining popularity globally and specifically here in France.
That's true. Interesting. Yeah. France.
Go France.
Free-thinking people.
Yeah, there you go.
Independent-minded, not willing to stay with the status quo, but they have to protest for something better.
Always protesting for something. You love music, and I'm sure you guys didn't know this. Ryan was part of the team that built the website for a very popular music band in the 90s, I
think it was 90s.
90s. Have you guys heard of Hanson, the brothers?
First paid web design job.
Like this guy built a website, so there you go. And last but not least, Sébastien, you're VP of Product at Payfit, an HR and payroll platform. You started your career at Yahoo and have since worked in a number of product roles across a number of tech companies. You're also one of the co-founders of this very conference. So
quite some time ago.
Very glad to have one of the founding fathers on this panel.
Grandfather.
Fun fact about Seb. I don't know how fun it is, but you seem to think it's fun. So Seb had to postpone his wedding 5 times.
Whoa.
5 times.
But he finally made it last summer. So maybe a round of applause for Seb.
Congratulations.
Actually, the most interesting part is that I made it with the same wife.
So his perseverance paid off. There you go. And when he gets tired of the digital world, he thinks about becoming a chef or a tour guide. So feel free to ask him for local tips if you're into hiking in the south of France. This man is the go-to man.
Go Aveyron. You don't know, Gao.
For those who don't know me, I'm Axel. I'm the co-founder of Panache, a product studio helping companies improve their product practice through consulting, coaching, and training. I'm the host and creator of Product Squad, apparently the most popular podcast for product people in France, according to the latest LPC report. And I'm also the host of Product with Panache, where I speak to product leaders across Europe and beyond about how they are doing product and how we can use their secrets and frameworks to help all of us do a better job at product. And hopefully these guys will be on the podcast soon. So there you go. In the past couple of years, we've seen a huge economic downturn, right? We've seen a lot of adjustment in tech with massive layoffs, sadly, across the board. Raising money is not as easy as it used to be. But it's not all gloom and doom out there. I'm keen to take a few minutes to reflect on what does this economic downturn actually mean for people in product-led companies and tech companies doing product. And maybe let's start with you, Melissa. How have you seen the product scene change as a result of this economic downturn? Or has it changed?
Yeah, I don't know if it's changed a ton, but what I will say is I think what we're concentrating on is a little bit different. So companies are now focusing a lot more on the business value of the things they're doing, which is great. And they're not just, the age of just innovating for the sake of innovating is kind of gone. They have to have some purpose. They have to figure out how to get through this downturn. And I will say too, like, people, like, the economy goes through downturns. Like, this is nothing new. We've been going through downturns for centuries, right? So this is something that is going to ride out eventually. But I do think it's making us focus on what we should be concentrating on. And I think that's how people win in an economic downturn, is like really getting your product strategy correct, like making sure that you really focus on that and prioritizing well so that you're not just spending money uselessly. So I see a lot more companies do that. From like a job standpoint, like, yes, we had a ton of layoffs in a bunch of companies. I'd argue some of the really big tech companies that did the layoffs, like, they just had too many people, right? And it was going to happen.
They overhired
They
at some point.
way overhired at some point. And like, I knew a couple people who had gone into those companies, and I was like, why are you working there? Like, you're a startup founder. What are you doing? Like, you got acquired. You made money. Where are you going to go? And they're like, oh, because they pay me ridiculous amounts of money to do nothing. And I was like, well, I would do that too then, you know, like, that sounds great. But like, that's the reality of some of that situation. So it's kind of like right sizing, I think, in the larger companies, but you still see like scale up companies hiring product managers all the time. Like, they still need product managers. And what's happening now that I'm pretty excited about is that the hiring, they're able to hire the product managers because those people are looking for work, and they couldn't compete with a Google or a Facebook who was paying like an entry level product manager in the United States like $250,000 a year. Like, yeah, insane, right?
Don't research salaries, guys. It's a
don't
bad
read into
idea.
it.
Don't do it.
Don't do it. But like, that's not sustainable. Like, that's just not sustainable for growing and scaling companies. But like, a lot of these companies were doing great things and they just couldn't attract the right talent because you could always get money somewhere else. So we're finding that that's not happening anymore. Those crazy offers are like off the table from the most part. And I think companies are kind of coming back into a reality of, how do we focus? How do we slim down? And how do we win and stay lean and ride this out? Because it will end eventually and we will go back up. So it's more about riding it out and kind of succeeding in the short term.
Brilliant. What's your take on this? What have you seen, Ryan?
I see it a little bit differently. I don't think this is a downturn. I think this is a return. And I don't think that it's we're going to go back in the near future to where we were. I think that the last 10 years were very abnormal and very artificial and very confusing. Because when there's so much money going around and there's so little attention paid to cost and time and waste, then a lot of things happen that don't make sense but start to seem normal because we all come into it and it's what's going on around us, and then all of a sudden things start to tighten and things start to break, and then you say, oh, what happened, right? But I think it's really a return to fundamentals. And if we look at it that way, then we see it as an opportunity for us to say, how do I add value in this world? What are the things that I am able to contribute that is going to help everybody else, right? And what we'll find is that there's probably going to be less, let's say, enthusiasm for a role which is an in-between role between everybody else. And we are going to find that we can contribute much more, and we're going to be valued much more if we can also put one foot into the actual, let's say, the work, and not just the management of the work. So either becoming a bit more technical and understanding better how things are really built in order to cooperate and make trade-offs with the engineers, or putting a foot deeper into the strategy and the business side and really understanding how the business makes money, why customers come to us, what competition really means, and how the things that we do or don't do are going to affect the bottom line and not the top line.
Seb?
I would agree with Ryan on the fact that we go back to normal situation. So I think it's good. I mean, honestly, that's fantastic. Of course, we've got to go through like bad period of time. Not only layoffs, but we've been focusing. I mean, I'm going to talk about France and Payfit. It's a scale up. We've been focusing a lot. We've been asked to focus a lot on the top line of the revenue. Basically going after lots of opportunities, creating new verticals and so on. It was like, you don't have time to basically clean your mess in the house. Like, so you've got to do with whatever you have and keep going forward. So Now the context has changed. You've got to way more focused on the bottom line. Like, you start hearing, when you've been in the business for more than 10 years, you heard about that, but like EBITDA, growth margin, ARR, annual recurring revenue per FTE, this kind of stuff. And this change of context is for the better for sure, but it's a massive change for the people that joined the bandwagon
during that time, right?
Of the last few years, and especially for younger product managers or even product designers and engineers as well. And so I think we've got a duty somehow to make sure that those guys understand this change of context. That's normal, but this is not a context they've grown up into somehow.
Yeah.
And so it's not only a matter of getting rid of them, it's a matter also of growing them, ensuring that they can cope with this new situation. Because let's be honest, we've got to have some product leaders, because tech and digital is going to be around for many years, and we need to have leaders for the future as well. And I do think that we've been a bit caricatural, especially with Musk in the US, like saying we shall get rid of middle managers. We've got to expand the span of control of the managers to ensure that you don't have too many. But the role of the manager, I think, is going to be important, because you need to grow your people to ensure they can cope with this new situation.
I'm super happy you're talking about growing people, because one of the angles I think is super important to look at this context through is hiring and skills, right? So are companies looking for the same skills? We talked a little bit earlier about metrics. Are these companies focusing on maybe profiles that have better business acumen, financial literacy? And there's this whole question around deepening your craft. So Ryan, you mentioned becoming a bit more technical, understanding or contributing to the actual trade-offs that have to happen day to day in a product team. What's your view of the type of skills people are now looking for in these companies? Maybe Melissa, you want to start?
I think one of the ones is what Ryan was talking about, and what Septa said too. It's knowing the business as a product manager. That is one of the biggest gaps I see in product managers, and it's actually one of the biggest gaps in leaders too. So over the last 5 years, I've hired maybe 50 chief product officers for companies, and one of the fastest ways a leader gets replaced in a company is because they don't know how to connect what the team is doing back to the business. They can't tell a story to the board about how this roadmap is going to unlock different ARR, or how they're managing cost towards a portfolio, or how, they're really looking at, retention and pulling that back into the actions of the teams. So if you don't understand how your business works and how it makes money, it puts you at a disadvantage, because there's all these business people who do. And if you can't connect what you're doing on a team and why you're building things back towards the money and how that grows, that's when executives start to tune you out. So everybody asks me, how do I get executive buy-in? It's like you speak their language, and their language is ARR, it's EBITDA, it's all the things, the metrics of what makes the business run. And to me, that's the biggest skill gap we have right now as product managers. And I teach a lot of MBA students, and they're interesting because they're very ambitious. So they think they're going to graduate from MBA with no product experience and be like a senior product manager, CPO. They all do. And I'm like, no, that's not how that works. But they do get that understanding at school. They understand the business pieces actually super well. So I say, if you can do the product pieces, if you can learn the tech, which they actually have a really big gap on, and then do the pieces of the business, pull that together, you do have a good shot of being a CPO if you can be a good product manager too. But I think if you didn't do an MBA, and I'm not saying go get an MBA, I'm not an advocate for doing that. If you are currently a product manager, I'm saying find out how to get that knowledge,
that exposure, right?
That exposure of the business, learn, ask people questions, sit with your CFO or your finance guys and say, can you break this down to me? I want to model this out so that I can show in a business case what we think we're going to go after. So to me, that's a really important skill. And I'm sure there's other ones that these guys can.
Get a BFF in finance, super important. What's your view on this, Ryan?
When it comes to this topic of going further into the business side, there's the long term of where we might ultimately want to go and be able to do, and there's the shorter term of what we can actually influence today. And if we, I went through a phase where I understood that I didn't understand anything about business. And I went through this very intense kind of self-taught MBA process. I read, for me, it was reading Clayton Christensen's book, The Innovator's Solution, not Dilemma, Solution. That book is fantastic. And for me, I still am running it through my mind every time I think about a business problem, a lot of those tools. But what I saw was that I could, thanks to that education, I could follow a conversation that the C-level people were having. I could at least follow the words. And I could start to think a little bit about my view of what that was. But I was in no position to influence anything. And what I started to understand is that, you know, if we're a product manager and we are not at the C-level, even if we want to get more people and more revenue and all these things, we are actually not really in a position to change the big things about the product. The bigger things are going to come from the executive level. What we are able to do is to try to tune what is there so that at least the customers coming in have the best experience possible. And then as we show that we're able to make small changes and improvements that are meaningful, gain credibility so we can work our way toward the bigger things. And one thing that's very helpful is to forget the spreadsheets and the finance and this stuff when it comes to the short term and get more entrepreneurial. What that means is it's not about understanding all of these acronyms and these terms and how to do the accounting. It's about understanding struggling moments. Not feature requests, not priorities, not how many people complained about this or that, but where are people struggling? When are people using our product, trying to do something, and then getting stuck or not getting the outcome they want, and then doing workarounds or leaving and using something else? The more that we can actually talk to customers in a very quick way. I taught at Basecamp the teams this technique we called support sleuthing. Support sleuthing. Okay. A sleuth is like a detective. Okay, so what would happen is the customer would write in and they would say like, I need this feature, I need this setting. And then the support person could say, I've got too many other tickets today and I don't care. You know, thank you for your feature request, bye-bye. Or they could say, we keep hearing something about that and I think there might be something to it, you know. And then what you do is you say, can we get on a short call? And you get on a phone call with them and you say, thank you very much for your feature request, and I'm trying to understand it better so I can get other people to get interested in building it. Can I ask you some questions? And then they're going to tell you all the reasons why they just need a button right there in the interface, right? Because they see it in terms of the solution. But then what we do is we reverse engineer what's going on by saying, what was happening when you had the idea that you should write a support request? What were you trying to do? What process were you in? What was going on in your day? And they'll say, oh, you know, I was trying to do this, and then I got this thing, and then I couldn't do it, and then I had to do it all by hand, and it took 10 times as long as it should, right? So we flip it from the supply side to the demand side of like, what are they actually trying to do? What are they struggling with? And what are the compensating behaviors? This is something that we can do. It's not a 6-month research project. It's not getting a bunch of authority to do something. It's like we see a problem, we get on the phone with one customer and we get a real story, and we start to piece together what's actually going on in real life. These are little things that we can start to do, and we're not going to maybe re-architect the whole product because we don't have the authority yet, but we can start to say, you know what, this pain point, when it keeps happening, is going to lead to churn. I think this is more important than these other 10 feature requests. And we can make a strong case for doing it. We can align people because we have a story to tell. We can get it done, and then we can build up a lot of credibility in the long run by doing that.
This reminds me a lot of conversation I had with Bob Moista actually on demand-side sales and jobs to be done. I think these are some of the skills that, like you were saying,
this is a baby step
you
of
can
applying
use right
that
now
stuff.
and act on this and incrementally build capital and influence as well in the company, right? To get to like where you want to be and have the impact that you want to have. What's your take on this, Seb?
Well, you know, we talked about the context that has evolved. Well, bottom line is, you know what, guys? Context keeps evolving all day long. So it's going to depend on how you feel. It's going to depend on the company you work for. It's going to depend on the global economic context. So I do think if you're in this job, product manager, could work for product designers and software engineers. if you're in for a good reason, not only because you love that, but because you really want to work your ass off and like deepen your craft, the number one skill you've got to develop is like ability to upskill, reskill yourself. Because it really depends. If you're a junior product manager or a principal or a VP, this is not the same skills. Of course, you will have to use. And even if you're a VP product at Payfit or like in a regular brick and mortar some company that want to do a digital transformation, it's not going to be the same. So your ability to cope with the context, adapt your reskilling capabilities, this is important. At the moment at Payfit, for instance, we ask for product managers, kind of full stack product managers. There's a question around, why is it that we do that? What is it that we shall do? Prioritization. You don't go after any opportunities. You shall focus on your prop value. How is it that we're going to do that? So at the same time, we work our hats off to make sure that the delivery pipeline, the way we execute, is being uplifted because we operated at a level that is not coping with the new situation. We need to be better at defining what we work on and better at delivering it, like finger crossing somehow that we're going to make the impact. But so you've got to be, the context of Payfit is I guess would be different from another company. And then it depends which level you're at. You're not going to ask the same thing from someone that is a product manager, for instance, a product manager that would question day in, day out, like the strategy. That's important, of course, but at some point it could be a lack of time. Maybe it would be asked, somehow demanded in this period to deliver upon the roadmap and make sure that actually the relation with the developers is top-notch, that what is being delivered is delivered on time, that the KPIs, the success criteria are being achieved. If you're a VP product or a CPO, of course, it's going to be something different. So the number one thing that some people would have learned, because we're out of the abundance era, is that your ability to cope with any kind of context as a product manager is the number one skill you've got to develop very early in your career.
I'm happy you mentioned principle, right? So we're seeing companies now, I think in the past it wasn't this clear, like people would do a good job of product and then get promoted and they will move up the ladder. And now there's this different tracks you can take, right? So now there's the principal route, which means you can be an expert in your craft and you don't necessarily have to go into line managing other people, for example. How do you see people choosing one path or another in this context of saying there's a focus on profitability and we have to, show up and deliver value?
Questions
sure,
me?
Please.
I think, I'm going to be transparent. The principle, what we've put in place at Payfit was like, you've got a competency grid. We've iterated upon it. It's been around for 4 years now. So it's a good thing, to articulate lots of discussion with your product managers, pinpointing on at the competency level, the skills level. And we created this career path. And we created this principal role, like super IC, some time ago. So same salary range than a product director, for instance. I'm not sure we've done yet a good job, and I think maybe in France, I don't know for the other countries, at developing those super IC roles. I think developers, software engineers are better than us, like with the staff engineers, than us being the product managers. So this role of principal is really interesting, especially in this era, like Ryan said, where you've got to kind of get rid of some middle management somehow. And you've got to have super strong individual, like super builders. So this is where this role is really interesting. I'm not sure we've like completely targeted the right level of engagement and potential competencies. Nailed it. And the competencies that actually are needed. So this is work to be done still at Payfit, like we scratched upon the surface, but I think it's very important for the industry.
Right.
I think a trend that we should be watchful of is that, and I'm just extrapolating from some very early data points that some things I'm starting to pick up anecdotally. If we, as the product people, don't know what we are talking about, and it sounds like a harsh thing to say, but I'm just trying to be straightforward because I think it's meaningful. Like, if we don't really, really understand the customer better than anybody else in the room, or if we don't really understand what is technically buildable and what the cost of this option versus that option is and how much time it's going to take and if we can deliver on time, if we don't really know what we're talking about, we are going to find that the businesses are going to move the power center back to the technology side. And I think it's already happening. I think we're seeing that the technology side, first of all, has been undervalued in the last 10 years, because at the end of the day, if you can't build it, what are you doing, right? And the amount of churn of like Figma drawings and then building something and throwing it away, and Figma drawings and building something and throwing it away is a little bit gotten out of hand. And what's starting to happen is it means that the engineers, they look at the product people and they say, well, you're not giving me something that is valuable. You're not giving me something that helps me do my job, that helps me succeed. And then if we look at who's contributing from the top of the business, we're going to see technical people who we know we need, who are building things, right? And we're going to have some strategy people who we can't do without, who we rely on to steer us. And we're going to see a little bit of a kind of a mush in the middle. So it's really important for us, I think, to be aware that this may be happening, and to take responsibility to have more concrete, kind of hard knowledge of the world, whether it's the technical world or the market world, behind what we're doing. I think that's going to be important. Yeah, just being a people person who's organized, who can keep things on track. This is a delivery manager.
Not
this is a
be
project
enough.
manager.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of that, but it's going to be harder to sell the story that the person who's really doing delivery management all day is somehow strategic.
Correct. Melissa, anything to add?
I think you guys summed it up pretty well.
We'll take some questions in about up to 7-8 minutes. So please, guys, start thinking about some of the questions you want to ask. I think Elise has a mic there, so she'll come in and give you the mic. So we talked about the hiring and skill sides of things. There's also two other things I think I'm seeing is how people focus and prioritize work. So we used to be in a world where there was a lot of focus on acquisition at all costs versus maybe more work around retention today. How do you extract more value out of the same customer base rather than trying to get more people? And there's also the angle of team performance. So I'm seeing more and more leaders thinking very hard about, how do I have a pulse on my product organization in a way that I can say they're performing this way today and I can track this through time, not for the sake of tracking performance, but in a way where basically companies are trying to get more for their dollars today, right? So performance is a big part of that. What have you seen on these kind of like two different tracks around focus and around team performance?
I guess a couple different things. Like the focus, I think, is becoming really paramount, like I was saying earlier, to just what organizations need to be doing right now with the current state of, not being able to raise money, not having a big cash cow to like really sit on. And like, if you don't focus, first of all, I've been telling organizations to focus like through all the cash cow, but they didn't, because they were like, there's always more money. And now there's not. So they really have to. Otherwise, they're going to die eventually. They'll run out of money. So I think like that's just becoming more important, but it was always important.
Yeah.
And the ones that focus, I think, win. And the ones that don't focus, they're usually doing like 80,000 different things. Or they're so big and they've got so much money, it doesn't matter if they focus because they're not going to run out of money. So you see that a lot. I think there's a big trend in product organizations right now to try to figure out how to focus and how to do it right. So we do see people trying to, figure out some prioritization frameworks, which I get asked about all the time.
People love a framework.
People love a framework, right? And I think build their product strategies and do it well. So there's a lot more talk right now about those two things. I think are becoming front and center because we have to figure out what it is we should be building before we can actually like arrange everybody around it. So I see those things, become really important. I also think people like investors or whoever's on your board are demanding some of those things now too. Like, tell me what you're going to do. What's the story? What's the focus? Whereas in the past, like I've worked with a lot of VCs and they'd let things slide for a while, or they didn't really like corner people for a little bit. And now they're cornering them and they're saying like, how are we making money, right? You're doing like 18,000 things. I gave you so much money last year. What are you doing? What am I getting for it? And that really means that we all, well, the leaders specifically, have to level up and tell that story in a very compelling way. And I think as product managers, we need to be aware of that, and we need to look at what we're doing and also challenge it, right? I had like a long time ago, I taught a workshop at a conference and for Mind the Product in San Francisco. And I had somebody come in and I did like a whole MVP workshop experimentation thing. And she said, I think I'm working on something that is not good. Like, I think the whole thing I'm doing is just irrelevant and it's not going to get us whatever goals we think it's going to do. And I was like, you should tell your boss that. She's like, but I'm worried that they're just going to fire me then because I won't have anything to work on.
Yeah.
And I said, no, like, go have that conversation. They're going to respect you for saying, I don't think this is the most important thing we could be doing. And she did that. And he said, thank you. Right? I didn't know, like, I didn't have the data. Let's actually sit down and figure out what we should be building, what we should be working on. So I would say, like, the more you raise those conversations with the rest of the organization, the more you tell people that, they're going to see you as somebody who cares, first of all, about the success of the company. And two, it's something that you can control. You can control that little area that you're working on. Whereas, you know, if your executives don't have a strategy, which happens a lot, or are really unfocused, right? That's hard to control. So you can look at, what am I doing? What do we think we're going to get out of it? And I also tell people too, if they can't see like a strategy at a company, go ask questions, because it usually lives in somebody's head. So whether or not they're prioritizing super well, I guarantee you there's a strategy somewhere. Somebody's just not communicating it. So you go ask them, what do we think, you know, what should we be doing? What's our vision? Okay, if I release this thing, what do we think will happen? Can I write it down so we can go check and see if we hit those metrics? And if not, can we actually interrogate it and figure out why, right? And just those conversations, though, start, I think, a nice push for the company to start saying, hey, like, why are we doing that, right? Like, and it gets that focus in. So I think that's really important. And I think, like, now more than ever, we've always needed to focus, but like now more than ever, I think it's going to help product managers shine if they can have those conversations, if they can bring it to the rest of the organization, if they can help people see, you know, what you're building is actually important.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned this, and we had this conversation earlier with the Seven Ryan as well. We talk about this new economic context as a new thing, but all the stuff that we're doing now, we should have been doing like, you know, years ago. You mentioned earlier that you help companies hire the CPOs and, you know, put the product leadership team in place. How are these people thinking about like managing the performance of their teams, like helping these people to grow, etc.?
So I think CPOs are super concerned about that. Good CPOs, and they do come in and they look at their team and they figure out, where do I need to up level? What do I need to do to look at it? But they do a lot of streamlining their teams, getting the right people in the room, putting those fits about it. From a performance perspective, I mean, if you want to think like numbers of performance, there are, you know, your agile velocity metrics, which they're like fine. I don't love that as like a super performance metric, but you do want to make sure there's a couple things when you're looking at as a leader, and this is for a CPO or a CTO. I think both of them have to do this together. You want to look at like, can my teams actually ship things, right? Like, can they get things out the door? And that's like a big thing. And if not, what's the blockers? Is it the team or is it the systems around them, right? Like, are we actually set up to be able to launch anything? Like, sometimes.
Would you say that's like table stakes?
Table stakes. It should be table stakes. And yeah, it's not in many places, but like, it should be table stakes, right? It's just like, can we actually get things out of the door? And then you can work backwards and say, okay, if we get things out of the door, how are the teams working together? Are they working well together? Is the product manager just taking all the requests and being reactive and putting them on a backlog and shoving them at the engineers with no context? Or are they actually visioning and like creating a great strategy around their product and their features, right? Like, are the engineers like capable of actually developing this? And then you go back one step further. What's the quality of ideas that we're getting in the system? Where are those ideas coming from? And then you can keep going out and out and out. And then you can look at things like how the other teams interact, right? Like, how's marketing interact, how sales interact, how's go-to-market launches, that type of stuff. And I think if you start to look at those pieces, you figure out where the problems are in your organization. And it sometimes not just, the product managers. It's not the performance of the product managers. Sometimes it is, though. Sometimes there's a bunch of
Got to recognize it.
Yeah, you got to recognize it. And sometimes there is. And then as a leader, now I can pinpoint what it is and start to work on it. But I do see CPOs be extremely concerned with getting the right people in the right places, and making sure they're there. And I think one big trend over the last 10 years, when everything was a cash cow, and just because I guess product management, it's been around for like a very long time, but some people are just getting wise to it. Let's put it that way. A lot of companies went to hire people who were super smart with no product management experience. And then what happened is they ended up with a team of 150 inexperienced product managers, and they had nobody to learn from. So the CPOs would come in. Hopefully there is a CPO. Sometimes they won't come in, right? But let's say a product leader comes in, and then they look around and they say, do I have anybody who can actually execute and get things out the door? Or do I have to retrain this whole team? So one thing that I've seen people do is hire in more experienced product people to like mix it up, just so you have somebody to learn from, right? And some people will have to part ways, but other times it's just about adding it in so that the team can grow and they can learn skills from other people. And that's why I think companies that are doing transformations right now, your big banks, your companies that were not primarily software, are struggling because they took 5,000 people from the business and said, ta-da, you're a product manager now. And but they didn't hire people in.
Yeah.
And honestly, like, if you were a super competent product manager, you probably didn't even want to work there because they were just figuring it out. But now they're getting a little bit better, and they're hiring people into leadership positions because they realize somebody's got to learn from someone, right? And I think that trend is really happening as well.
Great. I want to pause here, just conscious of time. I want to ask each of you if you had one piece of advice to give to people in the room today. Let's do a quick show of hands. How many of you are product managers? Okay, how many of you are designers?
Yay.
And how many of you are developers, tech leads, or developers?
What's everybody else?
So, so mostly product managers and designers. What would be the one piece of advice you would give this audience today about, how to prep for, working in this new economy? Let's start with you, Seb.
Appetite. I mean, it's not only about love, it's about appetite. You've got to feed yourself. You've got to be willing to nail it. You've got to be willing to be up to the challenges, up to new contexts. And it all comes down to your appetite, ability to cope with the world, where you need to somehow take a grab of it.
A bite out of it.
A bite out of it. But at the same time, it shall fulfill yourself. So there's something around appetite. I'm sorry, it's a bit conceptual and so on, but it works.
You've got to want to do it, right?
It works but not in a conceptual way, in a more physical way. You've got to get engaged with this world.
Something more visceral.
And I do give this advice because it works for whatever the level, whatever the position you're at, and whatever your seniority.
Thank you, Ryan.
One thing is difficult, but if we have to have one, I would say get the delivery thing figured out before you go into the strategy clouds, before you go into the research clouds, before you go into all that stuff. Figure out how to get stuff out the door, figure out how to get stuff done, and get that muscle first. Then you can use that muscle in many, many different ways to do the right thing. But if we can't get things out the door, then the best strategy in the world isn't going to help us. And to do that, bring the technical people in way earlier. Stop doing the stuff where product and design do 10 steps of work and then you give it to the engineers. It's bullshit. It never works. It's got to stop, really. You won't get better delivery results until you bring the technical people in to the project design. Design is not making a drawing. Look at how buildings get made. Look at how bathrooms get renovated. Look at how real things made out of atoms or porches.
Porches, yeah.
Porches.
Melissa knows all about it.
Yeah.
It's not a beautiful painting and then you give it to the plumber. It's a schematic, it's a technical thing. And we are in the business of building stuff, so we got to get that delivery stuff straightened out.
Thank you. Melissa?
I'll say I did renovate the bathrooms in the kitchen too. Totally agree with that. Like
You have a lot
it
of
was
experience
awful.
then.
Yeah, and I'm like, this is such a good parallel. So I guess my advice is, it was on the tip of my tongue and then I forgot it. But stop trying to change everybody in the organization. I keep getting questions written into me all the time. It's like, I try to tell the CEO that he needs to do this, but he won't do it, right? Or I try to tell the sales leader they need to do this and they won't do it. And I try to tell, and it's like everybody's blaming everybody else. And I do see this happen in organizations when I go in there too. It's not just people telling me stories, but they're like, I keep telling them they need to do these things. And what's happening is you're just telling everybody else to change, but you're not doing anything yourself.
Correct. And in
Right?
fact, the only thing you can change is yourself.
Yeah. So like just focus on like nailing it, right? Like you were saying, like just like nail it. Like do your work yourself and show people what good looks like. And then they will start to see it and then bring them into those conversations so that they can see how like the sausage is made. But you don't want to keep going around the organization. Like the fastest way to make everybody mad at you is just tell everybody they're doing it wrong. Like they will not be happy. So try to like do what you can control. Like just focus on being a great product manager.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I'm going to take some questions now for our guests. Before we wrap up, we're going to take a picture. We're going to do a selfie with you guys in the background. So do not leave after the questions. Hang out. And you'll have a nice picture where you can tag yourself with Melissa, Sebastian, and Ryan later. So stay here for this. Any questions for our guests? Elise will bring the mic to you. Yep, we've got somebody here.
Hello. Talking about effectiveness and getting rid of the middle management part, what do you think about organization splitting the delivering part of the job and the discovery part of the job, like PO and PM?
I feel like Ryan would do a great job at this. And Ryan, please, you can give us a no BS answer. We're happy.
Yeah. So I draw the Figma file, you build it, right? Is that the idea?
Yeah.
Yeah. Does it work?
No.
Case closed. Thank you.
So I'll also say like the PO-PM divide, I just rant about this all the time, is from SAFe. That's not a good way to do it. It's from anybody doing scaled agile framework here, SAFe. Anybody heard of that?
No way.
I'm pretending
Frickin'.
I've never heard of it.
Very honest person there in the second row.
And I will tell you that whole framework was built by people who have never done product management in their lives. So that should tell you about what they think of those roles. So that's become a thing that kind of came out of SAFe, came out of Agile. It didn't come out of good product management. It came out of this weird, thing that we were selling to make money out of large corporations because we showed everybody all these little boxes on it. So like the PO-PM divide is, bullshit, like I said. So.
Like,
There you go.
actually, the product owner role was also coming from Scrum.
Yes, from
Correct.
Scrum, and that's where SAFe came
Yeah.
from. So Scrum
And-
SAFe was made by the Scrum people
Yeah.
because they said, how do we sell more Scrum? And we'll put it in like a wrapper.
And the product owner role was actually quite working well in the Scrum environments. We were doing that at Yahoo. Well, we got screwed by Google anyway, but but then the combination of PM, PO, I think that's a massive mistake for sure.
Yeah, that's like the whole beginning of my book is ranting about this because so Agile, where the PO-PM thing came, like there was a whole group of people in Silicon Valley who were doing product management, right? And then there was a bunch of consultants in the rest of the world building software in banks and large companies, and that's how Scrum came about. That's how they started it. So what happened was they were going into the companies, and I asked all the Agile Manifesto people about this, so I know the story. I've been researching this for a long time. So what happened was they would basically get blamed when they were building the wrong thing. So they said, we're going to make this PO role, grab somebody from internal of the business. You tell us, you prioritize our backlog and tell us what to build, and we'll break it down into smaller chunks, and then you'll see it, and you'll tell us if it's good or not. And that's where the PO role came from. So it didn't actually come out of good product management like you see in your SaaS companies and your Googles and stuff like that. It came out of consulting. and it came out of from people who were developers, not from product managers. So this really was built up then in the model, and then we took it and we applied it. Now, I think it works fine if you take a PO and that person is a product manager, right? Like PO, PM, same thing. If you want to call them product owner because you're using Scrum, fine. But think about it, like one day Scrum is going to go away. I guarantee you, right? Like you could do Kanban, you could do whatever the hell you want to do, but it will leave, which is going to make everybody very sad because I just learned it for the last like 10 years.
There'll be a new flavor.
But, yeah, there'll be a
anyway.
new flavor. So like, what are you? Does the product owner role go away just because it was a Scrum thing? Like, no, that's the product management thing. So that's what we have to remember with it. It's not two different It's not two different jobs. It's one job. And if you use Scrum, you just use the framework they created to work with your developers. But you still need to do the rest of the product management.
I want to point out one thing,
Yeah,
Pete,
please.
just to hit the other side of this, though.
Yeah.
Because we see that the Figma file thrown over to the engineers doesn't work. But it doesn't mean that everyone who tells us we should be continuously, constantly collaborating is realistic. It's not real that the alternative is that we are all somehow constantly interacting with each other and constantly collaborating. There is a real handoff. There is a point when the contractors have a thing that we have agreed we're going to spend money and time on, and they go and they build the thing, right? And I mean contractor, I'm using the building metaphor, right? But I mean, there's a point where like something has to get made, and now there's a lot of small implementation details that have to get worked out, but the bones are there. So there should still be a handoff. It's a question about that interface.
Yeah.
What do we need to know and already have solved when that moment comes where we greenlight the beginning of the cycle and some building is really supposed to start? Because the clock starts ticking at that point, and we cannot just be constantly
totally.
somehow solving it together continuously. There is a point where we should have it figured out, and we should say, now we go.
Yeah, I've heard like so many engineers be like, I hate Agile because now I get pulled into all the product management conversations literally every day. And like, I don't have time to actually go code. And it's like,
Yeah.
I don't need you here like all the time, right? They have other things they're doing. That's not their job to do your job, right? And I see that frustration all the time. So like, totally agree
Right
with
level of involvement. One more question, guys. I'm conscious of time. Yeah.
Same discussion. So I had the question before you start talking about it. So Ryan, you talk a lot about involving the tech teams earlier in the process. We commonly start with problem framing, your word, and solution shaping, but a lot of tech people don't want to be included in those conversations. They feel like they lose time, and also they don't feel really helpful during those times. So what do you suggest we do to have them be willing to join us
Get them on
for
board.
those first conversations?
Thank you.
So, a lot of it has to do. There's a couple factors to this. One is if we grab a technical person at random, our chance of success is not very high, because a lot of the times people go into tech is because they like having very clearly defined problems. So the people among your technical people who are comfortable with a little bit of like redefining the problem or questioning the problem or ambiguity, it's going to be some subset of all of them. So we do want to bring the right person into the room. The second thing is if we have a session where we actually know something on the product side, and it's not just like, oh, CEO said that we should build a chat app. Do you know what I mean? We need chat. Now the engineer is going to want to hang themselves because it's like no one is anywhere close to a real problem, right? But if we have done some work to frame the problem and there are constraints, right? We think we need a chat feature. We've talked to customers and this is where they're struggling today. This is what they do instead. When they don't have it, this is the workaround they do. These are the steps in the workaround that they do today. We have a couple ideas, maybe this technology, maybe that, maybe we can buy a library, maybe we can integrate with this thing, right? When it's a little bit more narrow, then it's fun because it feels like, oh, maybe we could do this, maybe we could do that. It's the constraints that make it possible. If I say like, let's all design a vacation, and it's like we have no idea what we're talking about. But if I say it's a vacation for a husband and a wife and the mother-in-law, and they get along, but they haven't seen each other in a long time, and the budget is this much, and they need to have some experiences in nature. Do you see? It's like, oh, we could do this, we could do this, we could do this, we could do this, A, B, C. So the more that we constrain the problem, and then bring in a tech person who kind of appreciates that they're not going to have some badly formed thing later, you know what I mean? Then we can have a very juicy 3 hours. And the last thing I'll mention is that we can set the expectation at the end of this 3-hour shaping session. We will know where we are on this thing. It's not like we're going to have another session and another session and another session. We are going to either choose a path, or we are going to frame the individual pieces of spiking work, which are not more than an hour each, and we're going to have the answers we need to either choose a different project or move forward on a path on this project.
Can I just add something?
Yeah, please. You have 30 seconds.
Yeah, that's fair, because this is what is upon our control as product manager. Now, let's be honest. Honestly, we've got a situation with the developers. There's a situation with the engineers. First situation is, I guess it's worldwide, in France as well. It's a scarce resource. The supply chain of talents is really scarce, so it's very difficult to find developers. Secondly, I do think there's an issue in the way they are trained, in the way they engage with product people, because that's one good thing to tell us that we've got to do our shit, basically, do our homeworks, etc. But you've got some developers that don't have the right level of leadership, appetite for product, and whatever you do, I mean, in terms of homework, you could be exposed to a lack of efficient engagement with them. So I do think there's something, you don't have any developers in the room, for instance. You don't have lots of them actually attending this kind of conference. I think that would be fantastic for them to come over. I think that would be fantastic for them to just, apply and go through your online course. Because that would solve some of the problems we're facing on a daily basis, but not all of them. So that's.
But I tell you, I see an asymmetry here. I talk to developers at developer conferences, and they're talking about product.
Yeah, I know.
And we have product conferences, and nobody's talking about development. Nobody.
Well, that's
very
why I
few.
talked about them.
Well, yeah. No. I mean, they're actually doing product in the tech conferences I go to. They're doing it. They're in it. They're doing the work. They're doing it. They're doing both. And we go to a product conference, and how many people here are building? Very, very few. And this is a danger. I'm saying just be aware, right, that there is some risk factor in the market when you have a lot of people with both skills and then a lot of other people without both skills.
I think this is an amazing conversation for the drinks.
Now we're coming to life.
No, but this is why low code is so powerful. Actually, it's quite powerful.
No code?
Low code.
Low code.
Or no, but it can be powerful.
Let's
it can
see.
be powerful.
Conversation for the drinks. Guys, thank you so much. Thanks for coming to the session.
Thank you.